Good afternoon or evening, and welcome. Kensington Senior Living has 7 unique communities, 4 located in Virginia, Maryland, and New York, and 3 sister communities located in California. Kensington is truly privileged to support caregivers and professionals from coast to coast. Kensington focuses on relationship-based care built on the foundation of our promise to love and care for your family as we do our own. That promise was what initially drew me to become a member of the Kensington family, as my father lived at Kensington for almost 7 years. It is programs such as the one you're attending now that are so important for those of us walking through a caregiver journey to hear from expert professionals on keeping us current with the latest advances in care, management, protection, and treatment of conditions that affect seniors and their families. Kensington Senior Living offers programs as the one you are attending today for our residents and their families. We are committed to improving the quality of life for our residents, as well as those who care for them. Today's presentation is part 1 of a part 2 series, Knowledge is Power. Our goal today is for you to learn from WayWiser about scams and steps to take action to defend yourself and others. If you're new to the Zoom platform, this presentation is in webinar format. This means your cameras and microphones will remain off and muted throughout the presentation. We will have a live Q&A at the conclusion of the presentations. Each of our attendees today will be receiving a recording of this webinar along with links to connect you with Kensington and WayWiser. Please share with friends and family. Please allow me now to introduce Lindsay Faeder, CEO and founder of WayWiser. Lindsay, can you join us?
Thank you, Susan, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Like Susan said, my name is Lindsay Faeder. I'm the co-founder and CEO of WayWiser, also a member of the Kensington family. A little bit about myself, I come from a long line of caregivers. My mom, my sister, grandmother, great-grandmother were all nurses. My parents cared for 6 aging family members in our home and while they were in senior living communities close by. Growing up, I watched firsthand the challenges families face during medical and financial emergencies. Today, we're here to talk about the latter, financial emergencies, particularly financial fraud and exploitation, something my family knows all too well. After my grandmother passed away, my grandfather decided to stay in Kansas, which was far away from my family. We were in Virginia and I had other family on the West Coast. He quickly became lonely and isolated and developed a pen pal friendship with someone he vaguely knew. Over the course of a year, this woman convinced him to wire over $250,000 to him, his life savings. My parents found out when they were visiting and saw a general ledger of written down of money that he had wired. And my mom spent about 3 years trying to get that money back. They spent about that much money trying to get it back as well. So they had to hire private investigators, lawyers, and it took a lot of time and a lot of resources that most people don't have. Every person on our team at WayWiser knows a friend or a family that has fallen victim to financial fraud or exploitation. It really can happen to anybody from all walks of life and background and ages. Next, you'll hear from Tiffany, a friend and colleague and co-founder of WayWiser, and hear her personal testimonial of financial fraud in her own family. Thanks, Susan.
Tiffany, can you join us, please, and share a few words about yourself?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Turn your video on so we can see you.
Okay. There you go.
There
Good?
you are.
There we go.
Okay, I'm
Thank
going to
you.
let Tiffany take the show away from here. So go ahead, Tiffany, please share your story with us.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Like Lindsay said, my name is Tiffany Fernandez, co-founder of WayWiser. And I wanted to share a personal story of why financial exploitation and the knowledge of it is so important, as anyone can be a target. About a year ago, my father met an acquaintance that introduced him to the highly lucrative world of cryptocurrency. He is 69 years old. He runs his own business. He is cognitively capable. He is fit. And he was a victim of these fraudsters who took advantage of his want and need for a bigger nest egg for himself and his family. He ended up losing his entire savings in retirement, and the stress it had on our family was very impactful. It was a long and sophisticated scam that took us over 6 weeks to unravel, and we're honestly still dealing with it. I'm here to tell you this, not from fear or to have pity, but to understand that anyone at any point, any age, any gender, any race can be frauded and scammed or exploited. My family and I are personally living this, and I'm so glad that you are here to educate yourself on this topic and wanted to give you a couple of tips to remember. When I asked my father what advice he had to everyone who is here today, to the audience about his challenges, he said, be transparent and open with your spouse and partners. So if you can remember 3 things from me today, I would like you to know is if you feel that something is off, tell someone. If it's your child, if it's your spouse, if it's a family member or friend, tell someone even if it's hard. Remember that a victim is a victim, that you do not shame them, or you do not shame yourself or feel shame around it. And be open and understanding to plan ahead and to guard yourself against these challenges that happen with financial exploitation. I hope that for the rest of this webinar that you learn something and you can take it back to your friends and families so that you can guard yourself against this epidemic that is happening in our society. Thank you so much. Thank you, Susan.
Tiffany, that's really scary. And I'm sure we can all relate to something that we came close to having this type of encounter. But as you said, that's why we're here today, because society just thinks, oh, that can't happen to me. I'm too smart for that. No, can't happen to me. But I love the 3 things that you gave us advice for to remember, and that is go with your gut. I have 3 kids, and I used to always say, go with your gut. If it doesn't feel right, it probably doesn't. And, that might be a term that we use loosely, but I live by it. I think you go with your gut on many situations. And that is, the other one is victim is not bad. Victim is just a noun. And so, we can't label it. So I think that's so important because we're embarrassed. I got scammed, and that embarrasses people. And then the last one is, which I think is so important, plan ahead, be proactive, plan ahead for your aging parents, plan ahead, because when you have to be reactive, you don't have the resources to plan accordingly. So thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. And you'll join us back for the Q&A, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Now I am thrilled to welcome Luis. Luis, can you please join us?
Hello, how are you?
How are you?
Doing well. I hope there's not too much background noise, but
actually, you sound great. You look great. I like your backdrop. Great. You're all good to go. So please share with our audience a few words about yourself, and then we're looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, so Luis Carvajal-Kim. I'm a director at a company called Optiv Security. We're a cybersecurity company. So been in the business for over a decade. Before that, I was with the intelligence community doing some cyber work. I was a counterintelligence agent as well as a human intelligence officer. So pretty familiar with kind of being the bad guy as well as trying to stop the bad guy. And what I wanted to do now is just walk through a couple of different things. So you can see the name of the presentation. I promise this won't be death by PowerPoint. I just really wanted to share some visuals with everyone to help reinforce some of the core messages that I have here. So quickly, I've already introduced myself, so we can save some time there. Quick statement just for pro forma purposes. I'm expressing my own opinion. They don't necessarily reflect the views of the company that I work for. With that out of the way, talk about 3 main things remaining. So there's this overview of cybercrime and fraud, some real life examples where I'm going to ask you to kind of, I guess silently in this case, try to see if you can pick out what is real and what is a fraudulent site. And then just some takeaways. What do we do now that we have this information? So the first thing I want to kind of lay out is cybercrime is a business. What you have here are just some examples of some things that you can actually buy. You can see the dollar amount and the Bitcoin amount. I think oftentimes it's easy to say this is just some activist rogue kid in a hoodie sitting somewhere doing something because he's, he or she they're a criminal. And yeah, they are, but there's money behind it. So I think that's the first thing we need to wrap our heads around is this is being treated like any other business nowadays. And in terms of the scale, what you're up against as far as kind of how much money we're talking about, it is extremely profitable. So here, that little line you have there, that's the combined revenue of marijuana, cocaine, heroin, all together. This is cybercrime. It dwarfs this. It's the rounding error. It's about 1.5 trillion with a T dollars more profitable than the combined global drug trade. That's the scope of what we're talking about. So you got a lot of people running a business with a huge amount of money. To help further clarify it, if we looked at this by gross, by GDP, by country, you got the big kind of the folks who come to mind. Here we have cybercrime. You can see there, that's more than 183 other countries. So the scale is gigantic. There's this huge profit motive behind why people are doing things. And I say this again, I don't want us not to scare, but it's really just to help people contextualize what they're up against. So now a couple of specifics here. When you think about things like fraud and cybercrime, a lot of times people will say, well, it's crime and the computer happens to be kind of just a means to an end. And that's partially true. I wanted to go over some of the big culprits. The first one is phishing. So this is probably the thing that everyone's familiar with. Smishing is really over SMS and text message. Phishing is over voicemail. It's all the different ways that someone is trying to get you to click or to call back or to do something which is not in your best interest. There's something called baiting. You don't see this as commonly outside of corporate environments. This is where, hey, look, there's a USB. I found it. And I'm going to stick it in. And it says something like, hey, this is the list of who we're going to fire in 2024. They're trying to entice you with a physical device that you found. You should have some level of trust behind it to click on something. There's pretexting for anyone familiar with the IRS scam, where they're going to come to your house and arrest you unless you pay them $500. That is them calling on the pretext of another reason. Or there's another very popular one where you'll get a text saying, hey, Sally, are we still meeting at 2? And you'll say, this isn't Sally. And they'll say, oh, well, by happenstance, do I have an offer for you? And then there's the investment scam. You might hear this called another term specific. It's very popular at crypto. It's called pig butchering. And this is really the idea of, I have a limited time offer. I have something, I'm either doing this in person or virtually to try to get you to invest your money. And then oftentimes what happens is it's locked in. Well, to get more money out, you got to put more money in. It's like this, it's this big pit. And so those are different types of social engineering ways that people can get the information they need in order to commit fraud. And then some common types of identity fraud. We have financial. This is the most common thing that people are maybe familiar with in terms of someone logging in as you or opening an account as you, basically opening a loan. There's benefit or medical fraud. So something that's really hot right now is it's your Medicare number that can be used to reroute your prescriptions to different addresses. So I would say control that number like you would control your social security number. It's a very popular type of fraud, as well as frauds involved with getting things like SNAP or WIC. There's child fraud. This is something people don't often think about. Children are great targets for identity theft because A, they have very little history. And so they're easy to kind of start small with, but also who checks their kids' credit rating? Now, just so everyone knows, there is a way to get a minor credit hold. So you have to send a special document to each credit agency. You can actually get a freeze put onto those. I would recommend that. It costs you nothing other than your time. And then there's senior fraud. So this is another big thing that we see on the rise. This is really, it's preying on folks who are either isolated, who might not be as technologically literate as some others, in order to try to entice them to give over information which they shouldn't. Quick kind of viewpoint for everyone to think about. So phishing is very popular. I would ask you to think in your head, percentage-wise, what percentage of phishing, or what's the media that it comes over? Is it smishing, phishing, email? What's the mechanism? So I'll give you a moment to think about that. It's email. So if you tell me that you got successfully phished without having any other information, I'm going to guess that it was over email. It is by and large the most popular mechanism to get people to do things because things are well crafted. We get kind of email fatigue. That's just something else to think about. There's a lot of phishing and it usually comes over email. So with that in mind, I wanted to give you some examples of, what does bad look like? And so we don't have a polling mechanism here, but I'll ask you. So here is an example of a screen. You can see what it says. And my question to you is this real or is it fake? I'll wait a couple seconds, give people an idea as you scan it. And then I'll tell you the answer. So this is actually fake. This is actually a very famous fake. This is the Podesta DNC Kieffer hack email. So this is it's a fairly well crafted one. It looks a lot like what you might get in your inbox if you from Google or Gmail or Alphabet now, if you did have a bad compromised account. But this is a fake one. It's a very well done fake. Here's another one. Is this real or is it fake? And the answer is, it is fake. One of the giveaways here is in that line right there. So a lot of times what people are counting on you to do is read the first couple of letters, paypal.com, and say, looks like PayPal, says it's PayPal, must be PayPal. Actually incorrect. The way that these addresses work is it's the thing right before the .com. So this isn't paypal.com, it's confirmation-manager-security.com. All right, here's another, again, a tricky one. I'm showing you a little subset here. Suppose that you saw this on your website. Is this real or is it fake? Got the little green lock that says, hey, I'm secure. It says apple.com, looks like Apple. But it is fake. This one's a little more tricky. That looks like in English, APPLE. If you can see the little red arrow, you see all those numbers. This is something called puny code. It's something that I remember seeing this abused about 2 years ago a lot. I don't see it as often anymore, but it still works. These are characters used to represent foreign letters. So if you were to write this out, you'd notice that the APPLE, it had spaces in it. Some of the P's might not be the exact length. It's going to look different. But in terms of the web browser, it looks very legitimate. And final one, here's an Apple ID login page. Is it real or fake? And if you guess my pattern by now, this is indeed a fake. One of the big giveaways, again, is in the website address bar. So if you look, this actually isn't assistance.apple or anything. It's ngrok.io, but it looks real. The images are real. There's a lot of jargon and nonsense in the address bar that we get kind of fatigued to. But this is indeed another fake. So now that I've kind of shown you these, I think what you might be experiencing now is, well, what can I do? If you just showed me all these things, some of which I might have been able to pick out as fake, some of which I might not have. So what do I do now? And I think a lot of the points that I'm going to bring up have already been reiterated both by Susan and by Tiffany. So the first one is accept that this is hard. And I say this because everyone beats themselves up whenever if they or a family member gets become the victim of fraud. People are really good at this. Right? Think about the job that you work. You're probably really good at it. Criminals and fraudsters are the same way. They're doing this day in and day out. You can see the little anecdote I have there. This isn't picking a needle out of a haystack. It's a needle in a stack of needles. It's very difficult. So just accept the fact that if you get victimized, remember, you're the victim. You didn't do anything wrong. The criminal did. I always say ask questions. So I think when you look at social engineering, how people get other people to do things, they are relying on how we're wired. Most people, they try to be polite. They don't want to be seen as overly rude or suspicious or aggressive. My advice is do it anyway, okay? Especially if someone is asking you for money or your sensitive information, I'd say it is a reasonable level of due diligence for you to say, well, hold on, why do you need that? Tell me, you said this is investment. Can I know more about the investment? And if you get answers back about, well, it's secure. If you get any type of answer other than answers to your questions, I would just be a little bit suspicious about that. And then finally, trust your instincts. Okay. So, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. If it just doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. I think Stephen Colbert had a great anecdote where he talked about, if you ever find yourself in a room asking yourself, hey, is this a cult? Then it is. And I would say, I think we often second guess ourselves, but I think a lot of times our minds are trying to warn us because something just seems off. And if we are able to really kind of accept that, and start asking questions, asking for proof. I think that would go a long way to some of the maintenance. So that's all the material I had today. We just want to give a very brief overview again of some of the things, the business itself, like how cybercrime is a business, the scale of it, as well as some of the more common approaches. And then these 3 big takeaways, I think that hopefully will help you have a little bit more of a ability to defend. But once you know this and start acting on these, I think it'll make a difference.
That's incredible. And a common thread I'm hearing here is go with your gut. And when in question, don't click. And I have a new strategy. Those examples were amazing. I'm going to read the URL backwards. Because when you look at no, seriously, when you look at the beginning of it, I'm like, oh my God, it says it's, PayPal, it says it's Apple. And you got me on a couple of those. I didn't fall into your trap, but if you read the whole thing, and the human mind typically, kind of skims it anyway. I love that. And for all of us watching that are nearing that age, the Medicare card, that's good advice. Thank you. Well, join us for the Q&A, Louise, and I appreciate it. And next, I'd like to invite Kristin, if you could join us and share with the audience a few words about yourself and do your presentation, and I'll be on after. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone, and good evening, or whatever time zone you're in. It's evening for me. I'm on the East Coast. I'm Kristin Kieffer. I'm a senior director with FINRA. That's the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and FINRA regulates all stockbrokers and brokerage firms in the country. We work under the oversight of the Securities and Exchange Commission, but we're not part of the federal government. So our purview specifically is brokers and brokerage firms. So I have a lot of experience working on investment fraud, but a lot of consumer scams in general, as well as asset building, like saving and investing and paying down debt. So tonight we're going to talk about scams. That's an area where I run the FINRA Foundation's work on investor protection. And a lot of the work that we do is research to understand what our vulnerability points are. As was mentioned earlier, we all have them. The scammers are really good at what they do. And, we can't be the master of everything. And while I love Luis's, I give, similar analyses of, can you dissect this, this address? Sometimes it's a new one, and maybe you're prepared for one scenario, but not the next scenario. So a lot of the work that we do focuses on sort of the commonalities of scams. And so one of the things I wanted to show tonight, and I'm going to see if I can get, there we go, some slides up, is an analysis of some weapons of fraud. These are some fraud tactics that are used in marketing, but they're also used heavily and deceptively in the scam front. And a lot of it centers on source credibility. I've got that right in front. And particularly with imposter schemes. I mean, Luis was just showing you several imposter schemes, like Apple imposters and others. And source credibility is that shortcut to trust, right? When we believe that a contact is credible, that a website is credible, that an email is credible, we are, sort of shortcutting our own desire to ask questions. And we think, well, what if this is legit? Maybe this is legit. I should learn more. And when it comes to investment schemes in particular, we often find what's called a phantom rich. But this also happens with lottery and sweepstakes, where something is guaranteed, risk-free, that there's some, dream that you're fulfilling through that experience. So in the case of investing, buy this investment and your returns will be so great in such a short time that you'll be able to retire at a young age or pay for your grandkids' college education or whatever. And so the phantom rich really is to get you to listen more. So if you believe it's credible and there's some incentive for you, this dangling carrot, then you're likely to continue to listen to the pitch. Reciprocity is often used in different schemes. And reciprocity is when, someone does something for you, you feel like you should do something in return. And I know many of you today are, adult children of residents of Kensington communities, or maybe you're caregivers, and you may be familiar with, free lunch and free dinner seminars. So that's not the cyber approaches that Luis was just sharing with us, but just in general, sort of old school tactics, sales tactics. These seminars may or may not be, in and of themselves abusive practices. However, they are sort of playing on our reciprocity. We're playing on that tactic in the sense that we get a free dinner. We're more likely to answer the phone call, answer the follow-up mailing, take that meeting, and that's where the real pitch happens. And you can see how these play out. I'll just name social consensus is when others are doing it, we have this sense that it must be okay. Social consensus also plays into FOMO, fear of missing out, because when we see others and there becomes hype, it takes on a whole nother aspect of incentive for us. And then scarcity. Scarcity is that last ploy where things are time scarcity, product scarcity, or even exclusivity. When something's exclusive and we're invited or offered this opportunity, it feels that much more special. And we know if we don't act now, we're going to lose out on that phantom rich that we were promised at the beginning. And so this is sort of an academic way of dissecting scams. But it's important because if we can start to recognize these tactics, we can start to recognize that they build emotion in the moment. Scams are not about rationality. And so I know our colleagues today have talked a lot about going with your gut, and it's important to listen to those butterflies. But sometimes when we go with our gut, we're overriding big warning signs. And so it's important to say, am I acting emotionally? Is my gut jittery because I'm feeling emotional? If there's an emotional reaction, the very, very, very short answer is stop. You may reevaluate, you may ask questions, you may do some due diligence, but if you don't stop in that moment, you're very likely to get yourself in trouble. All right, I'll keep going here. Another thing I wanted to talk about is some research we've been doing at the Better Business Bureau that talks about why people engage with scams. So we've got this, that it's emotional, not rational. But are there other points of vulnerability that we can be shoring up for our loved ones? And we found a couple of key points that related to higher engagements with scams. And by engagement, I mean they clicked on the link, they answered the phone call, they responded to the solicitation in some way. And not everybody that engages ultimately is victimized and loses money. Some people stop along the way. But what we found is that people were more likely to engage with scams if they felt some level of financial insecurity. And that came up in one of the stories at the beginning, that her father had not felt that he hadn't saved enough for retirement, was trying to make up for some shortfalls that he was feeling. Financial insecurity can be a big motivator for people, but not the only one. And social isolation repeatedly shows up in all of our studies as a really important factor. Now, this does not mean that you are always physically isolated. So when you envision, in the olden days, I'll say, before you felt like scams were mass marketed everywhere, we always envisioned this older woman at home alone who was lonely, who nobody was talking to, and she was socially isolated. And now she may be the target of certain types of scams, like lottery and sweepstakes scams, and even sweetheart romance scams. But it's not just about being alone, it's about making isolated decisions. So when people, they may be married, you may be a family, Luis just said, be transparent, or someone just said, be transparent. When you aren't making these decisions in concert with someone else, you are more at risk. And we find so physical isolation, but whether it's perceived or real, plays a role. And we find much, much higher levels of engagement with scams that come through online means. And that's where Luis was really showing you the latest. And I know that everybody on this call tonight has probably, how many junk texts or texts. And some of them may say that are potentially fraudulent. And some of them may say, oh, you'll have a delivery tomorrow. And you placed an order with an online service. And so you are expecting a delivery. It's really important that you, and I'm going to get to this a little bit later, that you verify information through sources that you already know about. So instead of clicking on that link, you go to fedex.com, you typed it into your URL yourself, and then you can use the tracking information. So just online contact is much, much higher likely to lead to engagement. But we did see preventative measures from knowledge, period. So just learning about scams, just participating tonight, just making scams a conversation at the dinner table. I was in a car with my parents last week. They had come to visit and they're in their 80s. And we fortunately didn't let them drive here this time. I'm about 4 hours away. And I was driving them back to their hometown. And I used it as an opportunity to have a scam discussion. And I said, oh, you know, my friend Catherine was talking about her father. And do you know anybody that this has happened to? And the story was that my friend Catherine's father had received a phone call from his granddaughter. And I say quote unquote granddaughter because we're talking about scams today, and you know it probably wasn't her. And it was someone pretending to be her, pretending to be in jail from a car accident. And she was a new driver. It's very possible that she had had a car accident. It's very possible that she didn't want to tell her parents. And so the grandfather felt special. He felt like he needed to help her. He went to his safety deposit box. He got $10,000 out in cash and handed it to a courier who came to his door. As soon as he handed money over in a shoebox, he started questioning this transaction. But at that moment, it was too late and he was afraid. There was a courier there for real taking his money. And he said he had never heard of this scam before. And so I talked to my parents about it. He's since talked about it. I've talked with him. So just having casual conversations outside the moment can help people in the moment recognize a scam. And the Better Business Bureau puts out a risk report. So if you're interested to see what are the hottest scams today, there's lots of them, and it's changing all the time. The Better Business Bureau just put out their Scam Tracker 2022 risk report. And you can see on the screen here, I've dissected it into different age categories. And for the older community, which I know is mostly what we're talking about here tonight, I'm in some of those older categories. So I'll just say online purchase scams are across the board, tremendously powerful right now. But let's just focus a little bit on this cryptocurrency, sweepstakes and lottery, home improvement. That's an old type of scam that continues. But a lot of the cryptocurrency-based scams are purported investments. And Luis talked a little bit about that. I think I have a slide on this too. This is just a couple of the top scams. There's many, many different variations. So you can take a look at the risk report there and learn more. Luis mentioned this, so I want to walk you through something. What we're seeing at FINRA, and I know a lot of other regulators are seeing and other law enforcement agencies are seeing, is a twist in the way friendships and romance scams start. And a lot of times now, and I think it's to evade some of the software and the junk mail filters that are out there. We're finding that these scams are often starting as miscellaneous texts like, hey, what are you up to? And you're like, huh, I don't know that number, but clearly this person thinks they're reaching a friend. And then, oh, I'm reading a book. You know, in this case, that was the scammer. I'm reading a book, but it starts often with this miscellaneous text. I received one that said, I'm so glad your daughter can come to my birthday party this week. Well, I only have sons, so I was suspicious. But two, I thought, oh no, someone's missing out on their birthday party invite. And I've talked to many friends about this and they say, oh, no, that's the beginning of an investment scheme. And this is how it goes down. And once you've developed that relationship, this kind of companion scam will unfold. So they'll start to say, oh, what are you up to? What are you up to? Oh, you're such a nice person. Thank you so much for intercepting my message. Gosh, you know, it's so wonderful. Nice people are in this world. And then they build a friendship and start talking about random things like their earnings in cryptocurrency. Oh, well, you know, maybe I should learn how to trade crypto. No. I want you to be my friend. I want you to be my wife. I want you to be my companion. I don't want you to trade crypto. And in this particular example I have on the screen, 2 days later, this target was being taught how to purchase cryptocurrency through a non-existent crypto trading platform. So it was sort of a spoofed platform, and lost $150,000 over a couple of days. Someone I was talking to the other night said, we can lose 48 years in 48 days, or excuse me, 48 hours, 48 years in 48 hours of our savings. And so it's important that we just stop, get out of the emotion in the moment. So how can we disrupt this scam cycle? Well, in some of our other research with AARP, we've been looking at what the cycle of fraud is. And we've boiled it down to 4 quadrants, 4 primary quadrants. And I'd like you to think about which quadrants you might have an impact on. So for instance, we find that there's often some sort of situational factor in someone's life that puts them at a higher vulnerability state. With older populations, we find that bereavement can be a vulnerability point. It may be temporary, it may be longer term. Financial insecurity may be a situational factor for some individuals. So, or it could be chronic, cognitive decline. That is not the primary reason people are victimized in scams. However, it can be a complicating factor. Is there something that you could do in your life to tackle what those situational factors are for your loved one, that you might be able to shore up some of those things for them? Or in the trigger space, the trigger is the prompt. It's the reason that the scam comes through. Is there something that you can do to block those triggers? Can you get better call blocking technology? Can you get better, text blocking technology? Can you sign up for filters? Can you find ways to disrupt these triggers? If someone's receiving a lot of junk mail, can you start to look through the mail and filter out for them? So what can you do to reduce the ability of the trigger to actually get into that individual's or era? Motivation. Individuals' motivations vary. Maybe they're lonely and they're looking for a friend. Motivation may be looking for friendship. It may be, a sense of fulfillment. I talked to one victim who said he used to respond to scam calls and go on special investment trips that turned out to be scams in many cases, because he felt special and he felt like he was doing something important and worthwhile in life. Where can we help our loved ones find value? Where can we find these vulnerability points and find another way to fulfill that for them? And then if needed, where can we buffer transactions? So at FINRA, we've developed a rule that allows brokerage firms to pause transactions that they suspect are associated with financial exploitation. And so if a client requests that, let's just say $40,000, and the firm suspects that there's something exploitive about that request, they can pause that transaction. They don't even have to liquidate the securities. They can pause it, hold it while an investigation takes place. They have to report to Adult Protective Services, and they have to report to a trusted contact on the account. Now, trusted contact is not a power of attorney. It's just someone that the firm is allowed to call to say, hey, something different is going on with this account. I suspect financial exploitation, or I've been unable to reach this person because of, were they in a natural disaster? And you can verify that that person is, how to reach them, or maybe step in if you think that there is some exploitation going on. So this is one, idea, or 4 ideas for ways that you can disrupt the scam cycle. And I'm going to wrap up here in just a second so we can get to your Q&A. If you do suspect anything, please report it. Report it. We say that people often don't report, one, because they're embarrassed and they blame themselves, but in large part because they don't know where to go and they don't think it'll make a difference. And unfortunately, in many cases of outright scams, the money may not be recovered or is likely not recovered. However, you have 100% chance of not getting your money back if you don't report. And you have some chance, depending upon the scenario, when you do report. So I've put up here a couple of ideas of places you can report, but there's a lot you can find on our resources that we'll share with you after the program. And if you know someone that's been a victim of a romance scam, the FINRA Foundation is now supporting romance scam survivor support groups through the Cybercrime Support Network at fightcybercrime.org. These are free. It's a 10-week cybersecurity program, essentially, and they're doing it with other romance scam victims, and they're able to share their story. Because if we can help someone emotionally recover, we can help protect them from any future attempts. And I'll save that for the Q&A, because I think we're gonna get there in just a minute. And with that, I think I'll turn it back. I would say maybe my last, if you do anything, please tell someone else when you've received the solicitation. If it's at all interesting, if there's anything enticing, if you really feel like clicking, tell someone else first for 3 protective reasons. 1, they might know about that scam and be able to tell you, oh, that's a scam, I know about that. 2, it delays your decision. And 3, just by saying it aloud, we often hear ourselves and go, wow, I see a lot of flags. So just always tell someone else.
I love that. I love the pause and say it out loud. You know, some of us learn from hearing things, and I think that's such great advice. And I have to do a shout out to our creative team for titling this event Knowledge is Power, because that just kind of sums it up. I have so much information, and we've had a few questions in the chat. Everyone who has registered for this will be receiving a copy of the webinar in the next few days. Share it with friends and family. The more people that we can get this information out to, the better off as a community of a whole that we will be. And I was laughing, Kristin, about the 2 things you said, that fear of missing out and kind of fear of missing the boat. That is tugging at our emotional, wanting to be there and wanting, I don't want to miss out. They're going to make a whole bunch of money and they're going to go on trips. And what if I don't participate? So that, to pause on that, I think is really important. At this point, I'd love to welcome back Tiffany and Lindsay and Luis. Luis, we'll wait a minute for you to join us. And I just must tell you, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of comments in the chat, how valuable this is. Thank you so much for doing a webinar on this. So sign up for part 2, because this is a 2-part series, please. I'm going to start out a question for Lindsay and Tiffany. And that is, how is the best way to convince someone that they are being scammed when they're convinced it's legit? Start with you, Lindsay.
Yeah, sure. It may take some time. I think, looking over some of the questions, patience is the key to a lot of these. And Kristin even mentioned peppering into conversations when you can, anecdotes about scams will help in case something does happen. So if you already have those doors open for dialogue, it is helpful. You may not be able to convince them. And just persistence is helpful, knowing that the first time you have that conversation may not land the way that you want. Keep trying, reframe it in another way so that the person might be more receptive. And yeah, Tiffany, I know you've been through this yourself, so I'm sure you can share some good tips.
Yeah, I think persistence is the key, as well as being supportive and being emotionally aware of the shame and guilt or fear that comes along with those challenges. Being as open as you can and understanding as you can. And I also like to just ask questions. Tell me about this. Show me the email. And when I do that, then I can say, oh, do you see here? Right. So I'm able to point out different things, and that also helps, them to think in a different way.
I apologize for that. I do think it's persistence, and I think that that's really important. So thank you for that. Luis, this question came in, and I'm going to start with you on it, if I may. How do I keep my computer protected, or what do I do if my computer is hacked? And really, my question to that is, how do you know? So really, it's a whole computer question about keeping us safe.
Yeah, so the term hack, it's used in a lot of different ways, I think. So, but some common what I call cyber hygiene tactics would be keep it updated. I know that everyone hates to do it, but when you get the little warning saying, "Hey, it's version 16.1.2," that's usually done for a reason. So trying to stay on top of keeping not only your operating systems or Windows or Apple operating system, but the applications you use. You normally get little pop-ups that everyone hits dismiss on. I think some basic cyber hygiene, keeping those things up to date, running antivirus and keeping those things up to date, and then just think before you click. I think we get fatigued from online. We're just clicking. It doesn't really hurt me. Well, it can hurt you, but if someone were on the street and had a bag that you didn't know what was inside of it and asked you to stick your hand in, you wouldn't do that without saying, well, wait a minute, is there a snake in there or something? So I would say treat it that way. But I think that keeping things up to date and just pausing before you click will go a really long way. In terms of how you know you were hacked, that's a little harder to tell. Nowadays, you often get ransomed or you get some kind of notification, but there's a lot of good software out there that'll give you at least some alerts saying, hey, something's not right. Just you just need to listen to it.
That's really good advice. Everyone has that fear, right? I mean, now we not only have little laptop computers we carry everywhere, but we have our little cell phones that are little mini computers as well. Kristin, what is the best way to identify an appropriate financial manager as we age?
All right. Well, what's interesting about that question is the word financial manager is loaded with lots of different possibilities. So I think the first thing you need to do is say, what am I looking to achieve? So am I looking for someone who literally just helps me overall on a regular and ongoing basis? So maybe you want them to manage the financial and investment decisions that you're making with your retirement accounts? Or is it you just want sort of a once a year gut check? Are you looking for a platform where you can do some of your own self-directed investing? What are you actually looking for? Are you looking for insurance? Or do you not even know what you're looking for? In which case, you might want to meet with a fee-only financial planner that doesn't sell product, that can just say, here's what you have, here's what you can hold, here's what you might need to fill in. And so a lot of times estates and trust attorneys can help you with that, or a financial planner could help you with that. But always know what type of products they can sell and what they can't sell. So you should ask questions. What is your business model? How do you charge fees? What am I charged fee on an annual basis on all trades that I make? Or do you oversee all of my accounts or some of my accounts? And then the last part I'll add to this is to make sure if it's anybody related to investing or even financial management in general, double check a tool called FINRA Broker Check. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to share my screen real quick. FINRA Broker Check is a free tool that FINRA has on our website. Anybody can use it. It's not like a credit check. Nobody knows you've looked them up. And you can look up the financial professionals or the firm that they work for, or both, and find out if they have any disciplinary history, what their employment history is, complaints, settlements, and any number of things. So you can see here in my example, Joseph Q. Broker, Jane Q. Broker, it comes up with different names that are affiliated with the name that you put or that might be related to. But red means they've been barred. It says barred. They were kicked out of the industry. If someone's not here and they're selling you investments, you have to say, why are you not here? Anybody that's registered to sell securities products like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, investment contracts is in Broker Check, and it connects to the investment advisor database of the SEC. So always go here, even if you're talking to someone, and even if you've been working them for a long time, just check them out every once in a while.
That's powerful information. I think we have our webinar as Mother's and Father's Day gifts now. So that's wonderful. This is for Lindsay and Tiffany and anybody else, Louise and Kristin, if you want to chime in. This is an interesting question. How do I keep my parents from falling for scams? And any thoughts on snooping on my mother to protect her? Lindsay, can I start with you?
Yeah, I think, the reality is you can't stop it from happening. The sooner you have the conversations, if it does happen, your loved one is going to be more likely to come to you when they do realize that it's a scam. Any education you can do early on is helpful. And I know for me, even, and my parents' background, my dad's background is in finance, and he'll say, "Oh, it could never happen to me." And I've been talking to him about it for a couple of years now. And finally, the other day, his computer had been hacked, and he called me, and I was really surprised and thought, "Oh, we've made progress in having that open dialogue, which is really nice." And so it may seem like, "Oh, it's too early to start." It really isn't, because it can take. It can be those building blocks that really make a difference down the road.
I would just add that telling our story, telling the story that I told today and referring it saying, I had a friend that this happened to, I would like to just start the conversation, I think is really powerful. And knowing that transparency and being open is going to be advantageous to them in the long run. Not that you want to take control, you want to keep their independence, and they deserve it, but you want to use the knowledge that you have as being a younger generation, or even different generation, maybe tech savvy, to help and support. And so starting that conversation, I think, is extremely important, and being persistent with it.
I'm going to add one little sneaky idea, and we have some success in this, which is you can deputize them as a fraud fighter. And so we have individuals who have been victimized in the past, who now share offering information, share tips, share ideas, share schemes with us, because they think that they're fraud fighters and they're helping fight fraud. So you could say, "Hey, can you recognize, like, I'm collecting some ideas of phishing scams. Can you send me everything you've got?" And start to bring in, keep it light, because if you keep the conversation going outside of that emotional moment, you're going to be able to react in the emotional moment in a positive way.
It's like Crime Busters. I love that. I'm going to use that with my mother. I think that is such a great idea. Help me. Let's figure this out. Because I work
Susan,
all the
if I
time.
can add one comment on the snooping part. Watching out for signs, I think, is fine. So there's certain signs you'd want to watch for that maybe somebody would be more at risk or vulnerable. So looking for those signs, is their mail stacking up? Are they receiving a lot of unknown text messages? I've also found in people that I've talked to that when there's reciprocity, so you're asking for control or more visibility into an aging parent's finances or life, doing that same thing with them. We have a friend who wanted her parents to share their location with her. She did the same thing, and said it's really just about safety in a family, versus it being about you because you're aging, or the child wants a little bit more control.
And sometimes you might need to change the email addresses periodically, or even, another idea is to have financial accounts, bank accounts that are bifurcated in a way that only a small amount of money is in the transactional daily account, even though there's plenty of overflow, so that there's just some sort of line there. If some is removed or taken away in a victimization, there's still a buffer to protect the larger assets.
That's so important, because you're protecting, not controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really nice. Louise, I've had my identity stolen. What are the first things I should do?
All right, so I'm going to split this into two pieces. There's kind of the really urgent part of this. For a medical item, I'd say stop the bleed, and then worry about the rest. The stop the bleed item, there's four things that come to mind. The first is whatever agency, whatever company you have detected kind of these false accounts on, call them. And it might be a fraud department, could be fraud, waste, and abuse. For government agencies, you might hear it called program integrity. Call them, explain who you are, say, "Hey, I think my identity's been stolen. Please freeze the account." So that's stopping the account. Then contact the big three credit agencies. So it's Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Explain what happened, and you can get what's called a fraud alert. There are different kinds. I think there's a 1 year, there's a 7 year, and there's one for uniformed servicemen and women who are deployed. but you want to get that in place too. And so that's really going to make these businesses now have to verify your identity before giving you any type of additional credit. Ask for a free credit report. Now, when you call one of those agencies, they're supposed to call the other two. It's up to you whether you want to rely on that or if you want to call them. But when you get that free credit report, start combing over it. And then I would also start changing passwords to accounts at risk. Emails, because those are used to reset passwords. Any PINs, login information, just start going through and cleansing. So that's kind of the immediate end. After that, report this. This is a crime. Call your local police department. Call the, I think the FTC has the other ID theft. That police report is going to be very important because that's what you can use to later on get a longer term credit fraud freeze on your credit report. But you can also try to pursue a court order. It might in Washington State, I forget what it's called, but they have different names. It's essentially it is an order that can be used to try to correct public records. It stays with it, says, hey, this person is a victim because you are probably going to have some headaches around trying debtors, people taking you to court because as far as they know, you owe them money. Gather information about the fraudulent activities, consider getting a specialist. But those are the things that come to mind. But those first four, freeze the accounts, get a fraud alert, start changing your passwords, and then report that crime. This is a crime. Make sure you get a copy of the report. Are the things that come to mind.
If I can add, the Federal Trade Commission's, Luis has all the right answers, but they're also, if you forget them or you didn't get them all written down, identitytheft.gov is the Federal Trade Commission's home for U.S. identity theft issues. And if you answer a couple of questions, it'll give you an action sheet that details a lot of what Luis just talked about.
I would just also add that every single person should freeze their credit. There's no need for anyone to have an open credit. It just helps protect it. It's all free. It's easy to do. And even if you want to open up a loan or a new credit card or anything, you can open it up for a couple days, a couple hours. Super easy to do. That's kind of like the first line of defense for everyone.
Yeah, but mobile apps are your friend. I have freezes on them. I can thaw it in about 30 minutes and reapply it. So it's really easy. I would also think about it. If you have minor children, just do it for them. It'll just pay off. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate of just freeze everything until you need it.
Luis has a 2-year-old. I happen to know that. So let's freeze them.
I froze my 18-month-old's credit the other day. I was like, I just need to do it.
We have one last question, but I just really want to encourage our audience to share this with friends and family and to join us for part 2. Please. This is for everyone. So we can start with Tiffany and just go around the room. What's the craziest scam cybersecurity breach you've seen?
So I just heard about this one with AI information that's coming through and being able to replicate things. There are AI generators that are using your own voice to then, if there's any voice passwords, they're able to get into the account by regenerating your own voice. And so which is crazy. And so the result or what am I trying to say? To fight it is the family has a code word. And when something happens and you say the code word, only the family knows that code word. So use a code word within your family to know that this is what we say and that this is actually me. Does that make sense?
No, it does make sense. It's like meet at the mailbox if there's a fire. You got to have a plan. No, I would agree with that. Christine?
Oh, I was going to talk about AI too. So I'll just say that a lot of what we're seeing in the cyber front these days is this, I started to talk about it earlier, but it's this combination of schemes that are coming together. So we're seeing this combination of romance or friendship meets crypto meets stock scams with an international flavor. And deposits are still being made in crypto, but you're actually purchasing actually US equities that do exist. They're small capitalization stocks. And so it's this combination of factors, and then you start adding AI into the picture and it gets very complicated. We have roles to play as individuals, but we also have roles to play in our, our business lives to say, what can we do to be disruptors from the intervention points?
Luis, why don't we have you join on that question? And then Lindsay, why don't you conclude us and tease us a little bit about part 2? Luis?
Yeah, so it's always hard to talk about breaches because if it's public record, then it's easier to talk about. I don't want to give anything away and violate. So I'll tell a more interesting story that we thought was kind of a breach. It's almost a cyber legend. I think I can't even remember where I heard this, but the idea was a very large company, global, was experiencing these repeated denial of service attacks. Someone was taking them down every day, actually at night at exactly the same time, like 2 a.m. Millions of dollars in lost revenue, and they kept investigating and investigating. They finally figured out it's in this one place, like in Japan. So they send people there ready to kick down a door and arrest people. And there's people in this war room waiting until they get a phone call saying, "Hey, call it off. Everyone can relax." Well, what is it? And they said, well, like clockwork, 2 a.m. So we were in this room where all these things can happen. And then they noticed an older lady walk in with, a janitorial bucket. And they realized that what was happening was she needed to plug in her vacuum like she did every night. At her time when she came in to clean, she was unplugging a very important data server, which shut the entire global network of theirs down. And so, you can just imagine kind of, if it's the A team just ready, and then here comes grandma going, "I'm just here to vacuum. Let me just unplug this because who cares?" And so we always get told that for a concept called, hooves not stripes. So when you hear something, people always want to think, "Oh, China's after me, Russia's after me, someone's after me." It could be a lot simpler. In this case, it was literally, I needed an outlet. So
Actually, that's a little bit of levity here. I love that. And Lindsay?
My craziest one or introduce for the next session?
How about we'll save your craziest one
Yeah.
to introduce the introduction of part 2. So let's tell us a little bit about part 2.
Sure, Susan. So we'll kick off part 2 again with another testimonial. So that'll actually be one of my craziest experiences, which was recently here in Austin, and we'll have our CTO, who's actually from a crypto background, joining for that testimonial because he helped us kind of unwind it. And what the next session is really about is how do you change your mindset and help change the mindset of your loved ones around you to shift from this idea of it can't happen to me, letting go of that ego and saying it can, and I can take control and action to protect myself. We'll be joined by Tami Anastasia too, who will kind of talk through how do you have those conversations with loved ones. She's a Dementia Caregiver Support Counselor and an expert in kind of family dynamics and framing conversations in the right way. Also, Kristin Owens will join us. She was formerly with the New York Federal Reserve, and New York is really a trailblazer state, and that they've got, they collected some of the most data on financial frauds that are happening in the US. And so she'll give lots of examples of different fraud that she witnessed at the Federal Reserve. I'll close it out with our approach to how you can bring a family together to really protect yourself and your loved ones. And we'll share our philosophy and approach on that.
Well, thank you. And good evening, good afternoon. And thank you so much, Christine and Louise and Tiffany and Lindsay, and have a safe night. Take care.
Everyone.